Okay, friends, it's 8:30 in Indian Standard Time, Saturday, 8:30 p.m. And, I was just talking to Professor Chowdhary that today we are at the 37th week of this webinar series. Time actually flies. I still remember the first day of the month of March 2021. I think it was on 13th of March, we had the first webinar. And today we are at the 37th week. So you can see the players from academics also and also on the industry, both from India and the rest of the world. So our students, scholars, faculty members, researchers, staff, not only from our institutes and then from the various institutes across our country and also from the globe, we are coming, the closer to each other. We are getting to know that what sort of research is going on in the field, broadly in the field of the manufacturing. Now, today, we are very fortunate to have Professor Girish Chowdhary. The topic is very interesting. The robots are coming to your farm. We all know that because of the industry 4.0, the automation is coming up in a big way in the field of manufacturing. Automation means the usage of the robots, drones, the automated guided vehicles. So all sorts of things should be there in the field of the manufacturing in the industry. And we also know that the usage of these, the robots and the drones is also inevitable in the field of the agriculture. Now, there are similarities, there are dissimilarities. As you know that in agriculture, the situation, climate, a lot of factors you need to consider when you design the devices to be deployed in their field. So it will be very interesting to the talk and interesting to know that how those features are taken care of when the robots are getting deployed in the field of the agriculture. Now I'd like to let you know about the brief bio sketch of the Professor Girish Chowdhary. Professor Girish Chowdhary is a Donald Bigger Willett Faculty Fellow at the University of Illinois at Urbana-Champaign. He is the Director of Field Robotics Engineering and Science Hub, which is acronymed as FRESH at UIUC, and the Chief Scientist on the Illinois Autonomous Farm. He holds a PhD from Georgia Tech in aerospace engineering. He was a postdoc at the Laboratory of Information and Decision Systems, Leeds at MIT, and an assistant professor at Oklahoma University from 2013 to 2016. Also, MURI. He is the winner of the Air Force Young Investigator Award and several Best Paper Awards, including a Best System Paper at RSS Studio. So request Professor Chowdhary to deliver his talk and enlighten us about the characteristics of the robots which are getting used in the farms and how much it has been leveraged and where to finally. Professor Chowdhary.
Yes, okay. You can hear me okay? Are you able to hear me okay?
Yeah.
Okay, yeah, there was a little bit of, I don't know if my connection is weak or the other one, but Okay, so let me know at any point if you're not able to hear me okay. And I'm using a number of videos, so hopefully they will come through
It
properly.
has
Okay, so
come, yeah.
let me start.
You
Uh,
can
uh,
go
okay, so
to
let me
the
start.
full screen mode.
I,
Yes, yes. You can go to the screen mode. Yeah,
I am in
it's
the full
wonderful.
screen mode. See my full screen mode?
Yeah, it's yeah, yeah,
Can you see the full
yeah.
screen? Okay, okay. Right. Yeah, the internet is a little bit flaky from, I don't know whether it is from your side or my side, but I'm not able to hear you okay.
Yeah. Now it's you can keep your video. You can keep your video off. If you face a lag, you can keep your video off as well.
Ah, that's a good idea. I will switch off the video. Okay, that hopefully is better now. Okay, so I'm going to talk about some of the recent work we've been doing in robotics. Um, and primarily the title of the talk is the robots are coming to your farm, and the idea is to kind of tell you about a new way of potentially doing agriculture that could be more sustainable and better for the farmers. So just a little bit about me. I'm actually originally from India. So from I was born in Mumbai, then spent quite a bit of time all over India, but primarily in Pune for a long time. And my, like everybody's grandfather, I guess, we had some farms, and we had some bullocks and all those types of things. So I really enjoyed visiting the farms back then, but then really had not a lot of connection with agriculture for a long time. I spent a lot of time studying aerospace engineering and then working in that industry, and then doing my PhD in the area of AI, machine learning, autonomy. But then in 2016, I started getting really interested back in this topic of sustainability and agriculture primarily as a mechanism for helping sustainability. So if you ask me and my colleagues, the people who work with me, what are we trying to do, right? So we say that, that the answer that like what we really are trying to do is we're trying to make terraforming robots, right? That's what we're trying to do. So, people want to go to Mars, and, NASA and Elon they're all working on the rockets to go to Mars. But what we would like to do is create the AI and robotics technology that can help terraform Mars. But of course, we have to start here on Earth, right? There is a lot of terraforming that we need to do here right now. I mean, the environment is in pretty bad shape, as you must have heard from many different sources. I'll try to explain a little bit about it. So towards that goal, my group primarily works in field robotics, learning and autonomy, and we are a very diverse group of people from pretty much all the different departments on campus, right? And what we work on is this idea of full stack autonomy, right? So robots that can be autonomous in difficult field environments, and that requires typically these three types of autonomy algorithmic modules: so control, perception, and planning. And my group makes contributions across all of these three different modules, and we also make contributions with systems. But one of the key things that we really do is this idea of developing systems that can adapt to unforeseen events. So for example, this is from my PhD work, is an airplane that is flying with half of its wing breaking in the middle of the flight. So let me show the next screen. So here is the full video of that work. Hopefully the video is coming okay. But this airplane in mid-flight throws half of its wing off and then continues to fly in an autonomous manner afterwards. So the question is, how can we create those algorithms that enable robotic systems to be robust and adaptable in this manner? And that is really the biggest challenge in robotics today, right? Mobile robotics, particularly outdoor robotics, is that robots have to be able to deal with an unstructured and changing environment. Now, whether this is in India, Mars, US, anywhere you go, this is this classic problem that we must all solve as robotics. So like I said, in 2016, I started thinking really seriously about agriculture. And I moved to Illinois. I transferred myself from the aerospace department to the agriculture department. And now I have a joint appointment between agriculture and computer science. But at that point, I felt it was very important for me to like kind of really bring these robotic technologies to agriculture, because there's a lot of issues with agriculture today, and it's been clear for a long time that robotics and AI will make farming sustainable and profitable. So the question is, how can we actually make that happen? So the main issue with agriculture, really, like at the root of it, is that we can produce a lot of food, right? So we all know the population is growing. It will become 10 billion or whatever large number by 2050. The issue is not, like, honestly, I don't think that the issue is that we need to increase the yield and produce a lot more food. The issue primarily, I mean, in some parts of the world, absolutely we need to do that. But the bigger issue really is that the production of food is not in balance with the cost of producing that food, and specifically the environmental cost. So greenhouse gas emissions, loss of biodiversity, water pollution, all these issues are very seriously affecting things. Oh my. Can you see? I think I have some kind of an issue going on. I apologize. I don't know what's going on.
Yeah, but we can see your slide. Yeah.
Yeah, is it still visible or no?
Yeah, it's visible. It's a paddy field that you are.
But is it in full screen or not? Because I disconnected my screen.
No, it's not in full screen right now.
Yeah, I will reshare again.
Yeah, no issue.
Okay. Okay, can you see it again now, the screen?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. It's in full screen. Great. Yeah.
So, and nowhere in the world are these issues more in question than in this corn and soybean farming that we do in the Midwest of the United States and many other places in the world. But so it's like we have about 200 million acres of corn and soybean, and they are grown in rotation. And they are in these very large scale monocultures, which are primarily one of the big reasons that agriculture is suffering through all these issues. So what I and a number of my colleagues started thinking about is this idea of, can we create robotic systems that will provide new alternatives to farming than the ones that farmers have available to them today. So primarily farmers use lots of chemical, they use large tractors to spray that chemical. And with that, there are some limitations. So we think that if we can enable small distributed teams of robots that can go from under the canopy, then this will create a lot of new options for farmers that are a lot more sustainable and also profitable. So these new options for farmers will bring farmers incentives, which is putting food on the table and making profit in alignment with the environmental incentives, with things like under canopy phenotyping, mechanical weeding, spot spraying, and cover crop planting and polyculture. So that's what I'm going to talk about today. And the idea here is that, at the end of the day, we want these very large productive ecosystems similar to the food forests that were present in the in olden days, specifically in the New World. But that's a long path, right? Robots really need to improve, AI needs to improve, agricultural practices need to adopt. So the place to start really is at the foundation of agriculture, which is in seed breeding and product development, and then move towards reducing the amount of chemicals that we are using, and then slowly build the way up to these systems. So let me start talking about seed breeding first, which is one of the biggest kind of areas where there is a lot of contributions that can be made through the use of robotics. So corn, which is one of the most common crops on the face of this earth, is actually not a natural crop. It was bred selectively by South American natives using a plant called teosinte, right? I mean, that's what we know based on the archaeological evidence. But it's not like some one day somebody was walking in the forest and they found a corn seed and like, oh my god, if I plant this, then I will have a lot of corn. Some of our staples are like that, but most of the vegetables and even meat that we eat is actually selectively bred by people over a period of many thousands of years. And cultivars of corn, for example, are stored under the North Pole. So in case we get hit by a meteorite, we don't have to go back 3,000 years. But there is a very big need to accelerate the pace of this seed breeding right now, because places like Africa and India, the yields are a third of what they typically are in the more developed countries, and the population is actually increasing in those areas much faster. So how do you do that? So geneticists and large breeding firms, industry in general, has been trying to implement methods like genome-wide associations. So what happens here is that they sequence all the genes of the plants of interest, and they try to study the genes type environment interaction. And this expresses, the genotypes express themselves as phenotypes. Phenotypes are visible traits of the plant, like plant height, plant width, how much yield it has, how resistant it is to certain diseases. And environment can include the natural environment, but it can also include man-made things like chemicals and different management practices. Now, the issue is that the genotype sequencing is a solved problem now, but the phenotype measurement is really not there. So what the breeders do is that they plant these very large diversity fields. Like this one is an example of a 40-acre trial with 800 varieties of sorghum, jowar, in India they call. And they're trying to figure out, like, these little squares you see here are a different variety of sorghum, and they're trying to figure out which one is doing better than the other. And you can, like, because they have to do this because there isn't like a simulation model of the plant. So what they need to do is they need to kind of measure all of these varieties so that they know which ones are doing better. And from that perspective, there is a big bottleneck right now, because, and it's called the phenotyping bottleneck, because all of these measurements are done manually right now. And not only are they time consuming, but they can be often inaccurate and literally impossible to make in some cases. Like, you cannot go around and measure the width of stems of 40 acres worth of plants. It's just simply not possible. So this has really slowed down the breeding pipelines. They could be much faster and much better. And in India also, there has been a lot of great work in plant breeding now, especially in West Bengal. They have these varieties of wheat that can stay submerged underwater for 12 days, right? And that's really cool. But all of this really needs to be accelerated with these types of measurements. So how do you make these measurements, right? You can have gantry systems like this, which can potentially provide really high resolution and a lot of data, but they are limited in their area that they can cover. Drones are really good, and they can cover a lot of area, but they don't really see under the plant canopy, which is where all the interesting action is happening. So what we need is robots. And people have been talking about robots in ag since like really early, since 1980s, really. But the main issue, like why we don't see robots everywhere in ag, is that the cost is just simply too much for robotics today. And a part of that is the cost of making the robot, which actually should be less, in my opinion, than the cost of, not opinion, in my experience, it will be less than the cost of making a diesel tractor, because you don't have a diesel engine. But the issue is really not that, it's the autonomy, right? If you cannot have like a robot, like you can make an electrically driven robot all day long, but if it is not autonomous, then you are just like, it's kind of pointless. And this autonomy problem is very difficult to solve because we have these very large fields. Data doesn't look very good when you are under the canopy, and these environments can be very unstructured. So since 2017, we kind of pivoted from our drone work to try and solve these under canopy robotics problems. And in 2018, we had our first major paper in this area, which got the best paper award in the Robotics Science and Systems Conference, which is a premier robotics conference. And the idea there was, like, we can make very low cost under canopy robots that are essentially 3D printed. And these robots can go and make measurements under the plant canopy, and these measurements will be useful. So let me try to explain this whole idea first of why this small form factor in robotics, right? So in agricultural robotics, there typically has been a reliance on much larger robots. Like in this one that I'm showing is actually a smaller one, but many bigger robots have been there, and they have tracks, and people just try to replicate what large vehicles do in fields. But you see that they often have issues, like this one just ran over this sorghum right there. So one of our ideas was to simplify this, and that came from our drone experience, where we said that if we could simplify these robots, then they will be easier to control. So in 2017, we came up with this idea of making a drone on the ground, right? Like a small robot that's very lightweight, so it can skid to turn instead of having to have complicated steering system. So basically just has 4 motors. Those are the only moving components. The rest is just electronics and sensors. And that this robot will give data that is at a very unique viewpoint than the data that you can get from satellites or from drones. And then what we did is we had a project back then called the TerraMap project, ARPA-E, which is like a advanced project agencies, like a DARPA for energy, and that project had a lot of focus on actually bringing technology to market and not just writing papers. So what we did is that we EarthSense, which was already existing by then, which I had co-founded with my old friend Chinmay, we pivoted EarthSense to making these robots, and we made 30 of these 3D printed robots, and we gave them to breeders and companies across the United States and asked them whether this is a useful thing. And they broke all the time because obviously they were 3D printed, they were not properly engineered per se, but the idea was to get the concept out and see if these robots make sense. And of course, like, we did believe that certain components could be plastic made, and we found out which could be and which couldn't be. And in 2018, so we did that in 2018. 2019, then we basically went back to the drawing board and redesigned the whole system and made this monoc chassis system where basically there's like a plastic shell on the top, plastic shell on the bottom, there's a metal shell in the middle, and there are these metal struts that carry 4 brushless DC motors. And then every year we've been improving that. So that was a 2019 one. 2020, we refined the robot quite a bit. Actually, a number of these parts actually get manufactured in India now. And so the robot itself has 4 brushless DC motors, which I'll talk about just in a minute. But along with that, it has 2 LiDAR sensors, 3 cameras, a RTK GPS receiver, and then internally it has like an i7 computer with lots of storage and another Raspberry Pi. So there are some innovations that we made in creating this robot. So first one was the shift to this drivetrain that is driven by brushless DC motors. So these motors have become ubiquitous now because of the scooters that you can buy for riding on the roads. At least in the US and in Europe, this is a very common thing. Little scooters, like you just stand on them and go around. But the cool thing about them is that these brushless, they don't have brushes, as the name suggests, and they use Hall sensors to detect where the stator is with respect to the rotor. And in this case, the hub stays constant, and the what is typically a stator in a normal motor rotates. And that allows for the system to be very simple. There is and efficient in different ways, and it can tolerate water. That is the key thing. So that really helps out with the design of these robots. And then since then, we've been testing this drivetrain system in a number of different environments, and we have surprisingly found, well, not surprising to us, but to a lot of people, that this system is actually able to navigate pretty much any terrain that we can throw at it, as long as the robot clearance is there. Right. So let me show you. So this is, like, we have seen all different crops by now. This is viticulture, so vines. Other than terrains like this, and even those we can do with a different modification to the robot. But I like to show this video particularly to express like this another philosophy that we have in when we make robots, is that we make robots for specific purposes, right? I think general purpose robots are not only hard to make, but they often kind of live this life of like you make this very expensive robot that doesn't really, you have to really hunt for a task. So in situations like this, maybe it'll be difficult. But other than that, and even that can be fixed by just raising the height of the robot a little bit if it is going to be a prairie robot. But other than that, like, there's been very little situations where we have found that this drivetrain do not work. And what I really like about it, so we've tested it in India also. So this is Chili's in India. is the compactness of the system. So you can just put it on a motorcycle and just drive away, right? So we think and then the design of it, like very by making it small, we made it very accessible, so people can relate to it really quickly. And I found like people from all different backgrounds to be able to very quickly relate to it. And the other point is, now this is the 2021 version, so we have upgraded the motors quite a bit now. And is that we often think that small is not powerful, right? And that's natural when you are brought up in the world of diesel engines, right? That you need a certain size of the engine before you can actually make proper power. But electric motors are very different when it comes to the kind of power you can draw from them. So these little 4 motors on this robot are strong enough to carry our engineer as well as this 400 series tractor, right? So there is some significant strength here. So I think as we go forward into the world of electrical vehicles, I think we are going to see some of these new surprises that kind of change how we think about things. Now we are not saying that right now these motors have the same power as this tractor. That's not what we're saying, but we're saying that if they have enough power to really do some tasks for the size of the robot. So now that we have that, the robot, the question is, how do we make it autonomous, right? So the place where everybody starts is this GPS based autonomy. So I think everybody knows about GPS. It's now that it's everywhere in your phones, but you know that it works based off of satellite signals, and primarily it needs a good view of the sky for the system to be good. There is a technology called RTK GPS, which can augment the GPS signal, but again, it also needs a good view of the sky. And we've done a bunch of work, which I'm going to skip in the interest of time right now, that helps do good with mild loss in GPS accuracy and some uncertainty with respect to traction. But the primary issue is that when you are under the canopy and very close to these plants, now that doesn't have to be corn, it could also be like coconut palm, right? When you're under the canopy, you don't have good view of the sky, so your position accuracy is lost, and irrespective of that, you have to navigate with respect to the crop that's around you, because it's a very narrow area. So you need to be able to do what we call reactive navigation, and the primary problem is of this row following problem, where you need to find the distance to the row and the angle with respect to the row. So one way of doing that, and this is where we started, is by using these LiDAR signals, right? So this is an example of the LiDAR point cloud as the robot is driving. So the robot is going forward, this is the LiDAR, and that's the point cloud that we're getting. And I show you this video because you can see that it's very difficult to come up with where the rows are of this in this LiDAR cloud, right? And that was the first problem that we solved, and the details are in this Journal of Field Robotics paper, is coming up with heuristics to figure out how we can find these rows. Now, if you have seen LiDAR data with indoor robots, you'll often find that it's a lot cleaner than this. So this was very interesting and a very seminal paper because for the first time we can get these robots in these very cluttered, noisy environments. And you'll see, some of these are leaves, like it's hard to tell just from the LiDAR point cloud what is what. So it's a very challenging problem. Now, we've been working on this quite a bit. And one of the things that we pride ourselves in my lab is that we don't just like write papers and forget about the work, right? Our focus is on really taking that technology and bringing it out into the real world, right? So we focus really a lot on the impact. So these are the types of tests that we'll put our robots through, right? So we'll put the autonomy algorithms on there and then really try to break them. So that we really know whether this is working or not. So by now we've had many kilometers of this testing, and we also try to bring that out into the open. So EarthSense, the company, licensed this technology from the university, and then has gone out and made these robots. So in 2021, EarthSense made 100 of these robots, and they do that high throughput phenotyping now, the problem that we solved. And this is now a product that farmers, breeders, and large companies can have access to. And I'm not going to talk too much about the details there, but very interesting and very strong results are coming out of what Earthsense has been doing. They have an office in India actually. And it's really exciting where this technology is going with the high throughput phenotyping. And it appeared in New York Times. So I mean, there's really very interesting things, and I bring this up because very purposefully we have tried to kind of position the robot and this idea of agricultural autonomy in a new, fresh perspective, right? So something different, something that's something that takes a novel look at how we can try to solve this agricultural autonomy problem, rather than just automating tractors or I mean, those are all valid ways of doing it, but in the long term, what we really want are new robots that are specifically designed for agriculture. So that was kind of the story of the high throughput phenotyping. How do we bring this technology to farmers? That's the big question, right? So we are in the US. US is one of the largest producers of all kinds of grain and fruit and vegetables. It is primarily a result of the first and second green revolution, which also had a major impact on India. But primarily through the green revolution, the idea is that you have these better varieties of seeds, which we saw through the how throughput phenotyping can help. But then the other part of the green revolution is you control the pests and in the environment through lots of chemicals. So whether they are pesticides, whether it's urea, nitrogen. So this kind of industrial agriculture idea is basically to kind of treat the land as a medium and plant, and whatever nutrition deficiency there is, you just dump more nitrogen in. And then you put more pesticide in. But the more and more I talk to crop scientists, whether it's in the US or which is like way ahead in this thing, and as is facing many of those issues that are only now starting to emerge in India. But very recently I was in Pune and I was talking to Mahatma Phule Krishi Vidyapit, and I heard the agronomist there, Professor Tupe, complaining about reduction in biodiversity in the soil because of excessive use of herbicides. So this issue is now really coming to a tropical place like India, which is really worrisome in many ways. But we need it, right? We need these in the way we do agriculture. We need this because otherwise we cannot feed the population that we have. But there are many issues with this method. Like this is an example of the spread of herbicide-resistant weeds, and not just everywhere in the world. This has become now a major issue. And these came up because we spread a lot of chemicals and then the weeds evolved. And in India, of course, we know that the farm sizes are small. So farmers are not able to afford those large equipment. So they end up having to rely on manual labor a lot. And it's often exploitative. And it's often not really nice for the people who work in the farms. And not only that, it's very difficult to find the farm labor. It's not surprising, right? Who would want to do this work when you can go into a nearby town and get much more pay for doing more comfortable work? So overall, agriculture is in this major labor crisis, and it's in a funny way too, because if you look at the US, right, the amount of money the farmer keeps has been reducing over time. On the top, there is commodity pressure, pricing pressure, and on the bottom, there is the cost of the chemicals that they're using. So funnily enough, labor costs have dropped because, like 62% of the US was into agriculture, and now it is only like 2%. In India, it's still, I think, more than 50% people are in agriculture. I may be wrong on the exact number, but it is a significant number of people. This has happened because this labor has been replaced by equipment. So capital is, equipment, and intermediate is all the chemicals and seeds. Funnily enough, the cost of land has dropped, right? And this is because less and more and more marginal land is being brought back into production through the use of chemicals. So it's become quite a bit of a this chemical intensive agriculture is becoming quite a bit of a problem. So how do you fix this, right? I mean, we can go and automate tractors and make all of those things happen, and a lot of people and companies are doing that, and I think that's perfectly valid. Our technologies are very applicable to that also. But what we would really like to do is think about a more long-term play, right? And the more long-term plays, can we create more productive ecosystems so that the biodiversity is retained, soil microbes are doing good, because soil microbes is how the soil retains its health. And we can have plants that help each other. Now that may be a dream that is maybe 10 years away, but right now what we can do is, if we can create more dexterous systems, more systems that are more compact and can do other things, we can actually create better diversity just within the crop rotations, especially in large scale monocultures like the US. So I'll give you one example. So in the US, because our season, we were just talking, it's cold here now, right? There is hardly any sun. For the next 6 months, this will be the case. Until April, there will be nothing growing from the ground. And in April, everything will come back up. So what they do here is, for all of those months from October or November to April, the soils lay bare because they have harvested and there's nothing on the ground. So that's really not good for the soil. It's not good. There's no carbon that's being sequestered in there. So one way to fix that is to plant like a green cover, right? And you can plant that and it just stays. You don't have to harvest it or anything. It just stays over the winter. It just does, serves as food for the microbes in the soil. It suppresses weeds, and then you can plant either across this cover in the spring, or you can kill it and then plant on that again. But the issue with this cover crop planting is that it's expensive right now. And by the time they do it post harvest with the large tractors, is not enough sunlight for the cover crop to establish. So not a lot of farmers are doing it. So one thing that these small robots can do is they can go under this canopy and plant this cover crop, right? So you can see an idea. And this is something that we've been working on, and at a very low cost. So in order to do that, what we would have to do is bring the level of this robot autonomy up to somewhere around here, level 3, where one human is able to control many robots. Now, most tractors in the US run off of GPS, but they still need the human to be in there. So they're at level 1. Now, there are some companies that are claiming to be at level 2, where the human doesn't need to be on site, but we shall see how well that gets deployed. But really, if for small robots to be practical, you need this multi-robot method, right? One human to many robots. And the trick, I think, primarily in agriculture, but honestly in all other walks of robotics, is that not only does this autonomy have to increase, the cost has to drop, right? So the cost of expensive sensors has to be replaced with better AI. So let me give you some examples of what we've been doing in this area. So on the robot, what we have is, there's this Intel NUC. So that's like $800 component. And then there's like this cheaper Raspberry Pi. Now, what would be nice is if we can get rid of this NUC, get rid of the LiDARs, which are two other extremely costly components, and make a robot that only uses a Raspberry Pi. So what the robot has to do for level 3 autonomy is that they need to be able to follow these paths, right? So, and as we know from before, in the row, the GPS is not very good. So it has to use a different way of controlling itself in the row. And then when it's out of the row, it has to use a different way, because the LiDAR is not very good when you get out of the row. And, again, I'll skip the details a little bit. So how do you do that? So one of the naive ways of doing it is basically have a swapping system, right? So you create a detector, you create an AI that's basically able to detect whether or not the robot is in the canopy or out of the canopy. When it's out of the canopy, it switches to this GPS idea, and when it's in the canopy, it switches to LiDAR. Now, assuming that those transitions happen nicely, which is a big problem actually, this will work. So this is kind of the first thing that we've been working on. We'll publish a paper somewhere around early next year on this with a lot of field data. We think that this is a reasonable way. It's not the ultimate way, but it's a good, reasonable way. And the way primarily it can fail is when there is something that changes on the robot, right? So for example, in this case, the wheels are all caked with mud because it was a muddy day. So the robot will make potentially a mistake when things like this happen, right? So for example, in this case, it actually doesn't make it into the row. It hits the side, but then we have some band-aid AI that's able to detect this and then try to do a recovery maneuver. So it tries to come back and try again, right? This is happening automatically. And then this time it makes it. Now, this time it did make it. So we've made a lot of testing like this now. And one of the key metrics here is distance between intervention, right? So as the larger the distance between intervention, the more autonomous your robot is. And to climb these levels of autonomy, you need to increase that distance to many kilometers, right? So right now we are close to a kilometer, which is pretty good, I think, for these. And again, like, remember, this is under canopy environment, and these are controlled tests, right? So in practically, this is much better than this kilometer number, because this is a kilometer when it is always in a field, but more often than not, rows are like 500 meters long, and then you come out and kind of the whole thing gets reset, right? So it's doing, like, practically it's doing much better than this, but this is one of the numbers that we want to increase. Now, the issue is, how do you, like, we've gotten it, and total distance is now, many kilometers, many miles have been actually driven autonomously. But one of the things we have noticed is, in order to bring the cost down and to improve the autonomy, what we have to do is move to a vision sensor, not a LiDAR. And that's primarily because the LiDAR loses all the semantic information about the crop, right? So it cannot tell the difference between a leaf and a stem without a lot more processing. So the leaf, whereas a camera has a visual cue. Now, again, the camera has to process that data. So one of the things we've been working with a number of my students and Professor Gupta is this idea of vision-based navigation. And we published a paper, Arun, one of my students, published a paper in 2021, RSS, along with a number of other authors, of this idea of using camera images to detect directly the distance to the row and the heading with respect to the row. And again, I'll kind of skip the details, but the idea is that you get this 240 by 320 image, it goes through a neural network, and the robot directly tries to estimate a distance ratio and a heading. And then after that, it all goes through like this structured EKF MPC type setup that we have from before, which helps it follow the path. So for this, of course, we need a lot of what we did in this particular paper based off of a lot of label data, and then, correcting those labels. So the way the labels are set are like the vanishing lines, which give us the distance ratio, and then these horizons, which we can use to get the heading information along with the vanishing lines. And I'll skip some of that. And, we've done a lot of validation of this in crop environment. So in the paper itself, we had 25 kilometers plus validation. And since that was in the paper appeared in 21, but that was based off the 2020 data. In 2021, we've done many more kilometers of validation. And we found some very interesting issues. One of those is this domain shift issue. So a lot of the times the camera calibration will change due to whatever reason, and the robot has to adapt to this new calibration. So that's one issue. But other than that, this system is working fairly well, like fairly reliably with vision. We are now able to basically bring the cost of the sensing down to $10 from $1,500, right, which would be the LiDAR, by using just the camera. And the cost of compute, working with our colleague Vikram Adve from computer science, we found that we can bring that cost down also. So Hashim and Yifan, two of Vikram's students, led a study with my students on trying to figure out how can they prune the neural networks to get them to run on smaller cost devices. And they found that even a Raspberry Pi 4 is sufficient to run that after you prune those neural networks. So there's very interesting space for good computer science research in this area as to how do we make these robots autonomous and practical. And I do have to say here that at some points, I feel that the robotics community needs to try to understand these issues a lot too, because we often see all this autonomy, everybody focus on accuracy, and they don't really consider the cost of compute. But as we know, in agriculture is very good from that perspective, because it forces you to think about how much is it going to cost, and what is the lowest cost computer that you can use, and how can you optimize those algorithms so that it will actually work on those low cost computers. And this is something that other areas in computer science have been doing quite a bit, but the traditional roots of robotics often are in control and some of those disciplines, and there I feel like people need to look out of the mathematical world into some of these pragmatic issues, because otherwise we are just going to be stuck in papers, right, and never have impact. So yeah. Anyway, so again, this is Arun now, and he is now testing the system. This is vision-based system. As you can see, the crop is very small, and it also uses another MPC-based system that one of my other students has developed, Matthias, which is actually controlling the speed of the robot as well as not just the heading, right? So as the video that I was showing you before was only controlling the heading. So it's very hard now to stop this thing, right? So Arun really tries to basically make it like 50-degree angle with respect to the row at some point, but it's just smart enough to kind of break and then get back onto the row. Now again, these are very promising results. Work continues to go on, but we're starting to feel like this technology is at a point where it can really be brought out into the fields with more engineering, and that's kind of what we're doing now. Some of this again licensed back to EarthSense, and they are trying to really scale this up. Just an example of how this is like a full path. You can see the GPS drops in accuracy. There are some collisions that the robot has, but it automatically recovers from them. So this is really coming together now. So I'll skip these videos in interest of time. But like I said, coming to the point where we were able to make these cover crop robots in 2021, and they are off of the same drivetrain, just a different form factor. So the bin carries about 120 pounds, or it's like 60 kilos of seed, and then it just spreads this seed. Now the same thing can actually be used to spread fertilizer in India. I feel I would love to explore that a little bit more. But these cover crops have been, the key point is we can plant them in July and August, much earlier, and they emerge really nicely. And we did 100 acres, 102 acres in 2021. So again, using vision autonomy, although the autonomy I think needs is continued to be improved, but it's very promising as to what we are able to get out of these things. And I'll skip this. This is work by Katie Drix Campbell. It just shows like what can be done. Like, so she has found, she and her students have found ways of figuring out traversability, geometric traversability through the LiDAR data. And then another of my students has been working on coordinating the robots for mechanical weeding so that the robots can figure out what are the hotspots in the field. So, Professor, how much time do I have?
Yeah, I mean, you can take your time. It's 18. How long? How many slides do you have?
5 more minutes. Is that okay?
Yeah, please,
okay.
Yeah, please go ahead. It's very interesting, fascinating. Yeah,
okay. So let me finish then by bringing the focus back to this idea of polycultures, right? And I like to show these Benudin polycultures in the oasis gardens, right, in the desert. And it's a great use of efficient, like there's a very limited amount of land available that has water in the desert, but these ancient wisdom of how can you maximally utilize that. And we see this a lot also in India. You go to any farm, they won't just grow one crop like here in the US, because there's just not enough land. So they have to kind of use multiple crop rotations, different types of species. Also, India is good because you get 3 seasons. So how do you make that type of farming profitable, right? So these tractors don't do it, because tractors are very good at scale but not good at dexterity. Humans, which is kind of what we do in India, right, and many other places, are very good at dexterity but not very good at scale. Our robots are kind of need to really improve and come to this point where they can scale and they can be dexterous. So one of the ideas there that we've been working on with Professor Girish Krishnan is this idea of soft arms, right? And so these are like basically tubes, similar to how muscles work in octopuses. And these tubes, you pressurize them. They have a different type of winding on them. And as you pressurize, they bend. And by differently pressurizing each of these tube, you can get this soft robot to have different, like take different shapes. Now the issue is that it's not very robust and stable. So one of the things we did in the last year's RSS is to come up with this very low cost hybrid arm concept. So there is a hard arm which only has like 1 and 2 motors, and then the third is this soft arm, and we can get a lot more degree of freedom with just these 2 motors than what we would have gotten with a much more complex hard arm. And that's good because, again, you can bring the cost and the dexterity up. So these are like kind of the moonshot problems that we are trying to solve. So for example, you can go in there, and if the berry is far, then the arm can reach. Now in this particular paper, the position of the berry was known, but more recently, some of my students are publishing or have written, Shivani, for example, and Samita, they have written a paper on trying to use vision to try to do some of these tasks. So that's coming soon. So let me finish by talking about, because in talk in India, I always like to bring it back to my birthland, I think, how some of these technologies can affect. So in 2019 December and 2020 January, before COVID, luckily, I was in India, and I visited Kharagpur actually with Professor Prasanta Guha. We actually taught a course, a Spark course on AI and machine learning. And I had a chance to visit other places and just get an idea. And these are like numbers that I've come up with. There's a huge population that works in agriculture. There is a pretty big contribution to GDP. But the main issue is that most of the land holdings are small. And as a result, there's this idea that has been going on in our minds of like, how do you provide appropriate scale mechanization for these small farms, right? So you talk to anybody across India, you'll always hear these issues about labor, which is surprising to some Western countries, because they're like, well, there's a lot of people in India, they all want. But the thing is that it's not just like, people will do any job that is there, right? People work because they want to improve their standard of living, right? And working out in the 40-degree sun in India is not considered an ergonomically pleasing job when you have the option of working in air-conditioned offices or homes. But it is true that, one at least good news is that these robots are able to navigate these environments, and they're able to kind of, we've used them for scouting. We're starting a project in Pune, hopefully pretty soon, to kind of bring some of these technologies out. But again, like, in terms of, if I just want to finish the talk with where I think some of the big PhD level problems are, and also for the industry, what we need to solve is, first we need to deal with this idea of traversability, right? In the sense that we shouldn't have to set waypoints for the robot to navigate. That just doesn't, I think, is not a practical way of doing navigation in fields. Second is we need to deal with all these edge cases, right? So like I was telling you, most of the time the autonomy will work great. And this is one of the main reasons why, big tractors are not fully autonomous yet, but there are always like these weird things that will happen that you need to, kind of deal with. Transferring between different crops, different cameras, different robots is important. Plant manipulation is a huge problem. Like a pretty large portion of my group is actually now involved in that. And then improving reliability using multiple sensors, improving fault tolerance, being able to just randomly swap things, and of course cost reduction, bringing costs down even further. Like our goal is to make robots that cost less than $500 to make, less than a tractor to make. That should be the idea, right? And then multi-agent coordination and human-robot interaction and edge learning. So these are all very important. So the point of this slide is to tell you that if you're looking for a PhD topic or a place to go and work, I think agriculture is a very rewarding area, right? Especially when you bring technology into agriculture. Often we always go and everybody wants to go work for Google and Facebook and all that. And, it's, if you want to spend your life selling more ads, that's fine. But I think you can also try to do much more impactful things with things like agriculture. So let me end here. I'll thank one of our, like the Center for Digital Ag and the AI Farms, the National AI Institute that is there at the Illinois, and the Autonomous Farm, which I'm the chief scientist of. But primarily, I also wanted to mention, take this opportunity to say that EarthSense in India is hiring right now. So if you are interested in working in these areas, then we are looking for people who have experience in autonomy, robotics, electrical engineers. We're also looking for especially people who have worked on PCBs and robot design, and of course, people who have experience in AI and computer science. So please, if you're interested, definitely write an email to hello@earthsense.co. But that is it from my side, and I will take questions if that is okay.
Yeah, thank you, Professor Chowdhary. It's a really fascinating work that you have made, you and your group has done. And you have rightly pointed out at the end that the automation has to go far beyond, in the agriculture field. A lot of scopes are there. Just one question from my side, because we are also working in the, the image processing, AI, ML and all. But, I understand that the agri robots has got the two concerns. One is that the GPS tracking, its navigation, and at the same time, the imaging. And you are working presently on the optical sensors over the leader, and you have found that optical sensors is outperforming the leader and all. So do you do the selective imaging? Like how do you find out that when the robot is moving, which person has to take the image and then process it, or does it randomly captures the images from all the points?
Oh, I see. So when the navigation is happening, it has to do with every frame. So we actually try to optimize the number of frames we can process every second. So we know that on an expensive computer like a NUC or a Xavier, we can get up to 30 frames per second, right? And then on a cheaper computer like a Raspberry Pi, the number of frames we can process per second drops. And so that creates delay in the control. So actually one of the questions for us is what is the right number of frames to process per second?
Yeah.
Given a computational budget.
So I mean, what sort of optical?
Huh? Sorry.
What sort of optical camera do you use?
It's just a standard webcam, standard pinhole. Yeah, it's just a regular. It's not even a global shutter. Like we are trying to keep costs as low as possible. So, but we do a little bit of a exposure control on the camera to make sure that there's not a lot of motion blur. But we also reduce and we are because we are only using a 240 by 320 image, we can actually go lower on the camera also potentially in the future. Like right now it's like a 1080p camera, but we don't need that.
So, I mean, after capturing the image, do you go for the quality augmentation, or do you just process it to find out the feature difference in the images?
Yeah, so we have a neural network that takes the image and directly predicts the heading and the distance ratio. Yeah, and there are some other works in which now we are also using this RGB depth cameras. There we are trying to think about what other features of the environment we can find out.
Is it available in the market? Already the agri robot that?
Yeah. This robot is available. Yeah, you can contact EarthSense if you want to find out more. But yeah, there is an academic version also available, and they are now. I think the last I heard they are trying to release like a version that is more designed for innovators, right? So it is like has a ROS, full ROS interface and an open platform on the top, so you can put your sensors on. It's very robust and rugged. So yeah, you can find out also about that.
Good. So let us see some of the questions from the chat box. Yeah. So it's mentioned that it is a great presentation, sir. Can the Land Rover be tracked and classify the disease of the leaf on the leaf of the crop?
So that is a project that we have started. I mean, yes, the answer is yes. We are doing that. I mean, we're starting that project right now with specific focus on India through EarthSense in India. So that for doing disease detection and disease advisement to the farmer.
So another question is that do you know any of any weeding robots that can identify and pull the weeds from the roots?
Yeah, I need it for my front yard, right? Yeah, I need one too. So from the, I think weeding robots is something we like. I very briefly mentioned. We have been looking at them. Mechanically, I think we want to do the cover cropping thing first because it's kind of more in the alignment with this idea of polycultures. But mechanical weeding is absolutely a very important problem. There are already robots available for mechanical weeding in not fruit, this vegetable crop in California. But small sized weeding robots that can be used in places like India would be very valuable, I think. But it's a very difficult problem because you have to deal with, mechanical disturbance of the soil, especially when you pull roots out, then that needs quite a bit of strength. So I think we haven't gotten to solving that mechanical engineering problem.
I don't see any other question in the chat box, but I'm requesting the audience, one or two more questions can be taken up. Okay, one more question has come up. Is there any possibility of real-time inspection and control of crops using digital twin of an agricultural farm?
Absolutely. I think this is a great possibility. I think that is what the ultimate goal, I think, of a lot of this digital ag work is to do exactly that, is to create like a real-time uh, like a status report or a dashboard for the farm, right? Whether it is a digital twin or a much simpler interface, that depends on the user, like who is the user, right? If you're a scientific user, you might care about the digital twin. If you're a farmer, all you might care about is it doing good or not, right? Uh, but yeah, absolutely. That is, I think, the ultimate goal of a lot of this digital ag work. And then also what would be nice is like, you would have an app and you would say, the app would say, oh, you have this issue, like maybe you need to, you have the extra weeds in this part of the farm. And then the farmer clicks a button while they are, sipping tea at home, and then robots go out and take care of the weeds. This would be I would love to live in a future like that.
Real-time data capturing would be a real difficult job.
Right, real-time data capture. The transmission of the data is challenging. From the like India may not be such a big deal because I like, at least from my experience, the internet, rural 3G, all that is pretty reasonable in India because everybody has a cell phone. US is a pretty big challenge because you start to go into the backlands of US, the 3G and all that connectivity really is not good.
Professor Chowdhary, you can switch on your video now because the transmission is okay, it seems right now.
Yeah. Okay, let's try that.
Yeah, so the one more request is there from Mr. Dave.
Yeah, absolutely. You can definitely contact me. There's some issue on my screen right now, so I cannot see the chat really well. But yeah, please feel free to contact me. My email at the university is girish@illinois.edu. girishc@illinois.edu.
Okay, I think there is no more questions. So, Professor Chowdhary, it's a really fascinating work that you are doing, and we are glad to have you today. And really honored
Absolutely. And I will say one more thing. From 3rd of January till the 23rd, I will be in India. So if there are any opportunities to connect, we'll be more than happy to do.
Yeah. We'll be more than happy to host you at IIT Kharagpur. Yeah. So I'll contact you.
I'll see if but I might come later also. I mean, but definitely at some point it would be very nice to come back at Kharagpur.
Yeah, sure.
And, I really like the campus. Very nice campus over there.
Yeah, please. So once your the dates are finalized, please do let me know, and then we'll be in touch and we'll have discussions.
Absolutely. Okay then. Thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you so much. And I'm requesting Ananta to let us know about the speakers for the next weeks. Yeah, thank you. Ananta, quickly let us know the speakers about the next week. Okay, this is an announcement that we are organizing the 6 days training program on the industrial robots. So if anyone is interested, they can participate. Only very few seats are there. It will be in January 17 to 22nd. Yeah, the last week of November, the talk, it would be by George Vanderboot on the metallographic practices in welding. In the month of December, we do have speakers, Professor Supriya Ganguly from Cranfield University in the UK, the Wire Plus Art Printing of High Strength Alloy, and then Amish Thakkar from Infosys, the connecting bridge between IT and manufacturing sector. Then December 18th, Professor Devdutt Seth of IIT Kharagpur, Machine Vision for Manufacturing. And then on December 25th, which is a very crucial day, the Professor Feng Shu Gu from the University of Huddersfield in the UK. All our webinars you can get it through scanning QR code. With this, thank you so much for all of your presence, and we look forward to have you in next Saturday. Thank you so much.